word, take my word, take my word, take my word. Yo, that shit is cash, trust me, son. I'll never lead you astray. Take my word, take my word, hear how you think, how you think, how you think, how you think, how you think.
Hey, this is Doc. If you're enjoying the music, please head on over to SoundCloud, hit up my baby cousin, hit up Nickelangelo Music, that's Nikelangelomuzik, Nickelangelo Music on SoundCloud. Hit him up for any music inquiries because this boy makes that hot stuff. Hey. This is Doc, aka Dr. Lariat, aka Big Scran Vader, aka Royal True Orange Cassidy, aka the Chow main event, aka Suman Reigns, acknowledge me, aka the good Ba Boy, yeah, aka, I'm just gonna be a little bit low key, and not be a world warrior, but this is your host, Doc. This is the state of wrestling, a little bit more of a low key version. Not that we're gonna not go to Japan because of radiation poisoning, but as in we're just gonna keep it a little bit more tactful. And joining me, of course, all the time on State of Wrestling is Arturo, aka American Numbers.
Y yo creo que ahora me voy a llamar el periodista porque me están prestando mucha atención aquí con Larry. Hey, I think I'm gonna I'm gonna have to be serious now because like I'm getting like source for stuff now. I guess. Jeez.
Yeah, man, you got reference today by Thursday.
Now, well, it was a little bit more than that. We'll talk a little bit about and gotta credit Andy Nemedy for like doing the breakdown on how the numbers are being done. But we'll talk a little bit about I'll get to talk a little bit about machine learning and how that stuff works and how big data works just tiny little bit. People like us to do weird and different things, y cosas diferentes, and I think that makes us kind of unique. And I try to bring the weird or different flavors so people are entertained, right? It's like much like I like my wrestling. I want my podcast to go different places, right?
Yeah, well, I often call ourselves the smartest podcast, wrestling podcast, but not like the bar is set too high. But joining us here today is you can find him at the Pro Wrestling Torch. We have with us Brian Zilem, noted sports writer, noted pro wrestling writer. You could read his collision recaps on Pro Wrestling Torch. Also, you could find him on Blue Sky and on X. You could just follow him at Brian Zilem. Welcome to the show, man. It's an honor to have you. We've been talking for the past hour, but it just felt like it's just breezed by.
No, absolutely. Pleasure to be on here to talk to both of you guys.
Yeah. So state of wrestling. I'm going to talk about a little bit about wrestling because some news broke over the last 24 hours. I think the biggest bit of news that I'm going to talk about because we've been following this over the last since our first episode back in June, was the whole Warner Brothers Discovery sale. It appears like yesterday it went official that the sale is official, and we got the first bids from Comcast, from Paramount, and from Netflix.
I'll make the point that from the go, basically, I tell people this is the same way you have to read NBA trades. When you get on the trade market, a lot of the time you have to understand that certain teams talk to other teams, right? So relationships matter, right? So whatever, certain GMs have relationship with guys who used to work with them, guys they know, and so that kind of plays into this. So from the go on this, I've been kind of chasing the angle that Zaslav, who's the head of WWE and WBD and used to work with NBC forever. He was like an NBC Comcast guy, GE guy forever. And then he left to go do Discovery, but I've kind of thought that the possibility of them working with Comcast was in place, and lo and behold, it was there. A lot of the things that Comcast did around this whole process with WWE and around like how Southhouse behaved has been kind of really interesting. I always think the plan for them, and I think we were talking to one of our other frequent guests and BJ Bethel, and he kind of dropped that, like, he dropped the idea that like the plan was always for Comcast to split Peacock into the linear networks and the streaming component, and WBD to do it in parallel, and then like both companies, the child companies, were going to merge, right? So the plan was always for like the linear side of Peacock and Comcast and the linear side of WBD to merge the same way with the streaming. So apparently there, like the information was like there does seem to be some talk or feeling that this was always kind of the play. And I think Paramount's come in and put in a bid that's like kind of disruptive because they want CNN. But I think ultimately there's a plan in place that WBD has, which is they want to split and they want to merge with, I think Sasla wants to go back to the company he's familiar with. I'm an old General Electric guy, and I understand all the GE guys and Comcast and whatnot kind of like have the same corporate culture. So they kind of want to merge back together. Now Netflix is coming in because they want HBO. Peacock wants it too. And there's a lot of like little things and little details on it, but it's really interesting that it's always come back to like, oh yeah, the GE guys are talking to the GE guys, right? And I say GE because GE was Comcast, right? So GE split into Comcast, and then Comcast kind of is in this, and like Zaslav left that culture, but the corporate culture is similar, and so they're thinking on the same paths.
Yeah, I think what the news was that Comcast wanted to bid on the streaming rights and the film rights. I think that's all that they're bidding on. Whereas I think Paramount wanted to bid on the WBD as a whole. I think that's the difference in what they're doing. So the whole splitting off the linear networks makes perfect sense if you think about it. So Brian, do you have any like sort of like feelings on this sort of like how this sale is going?
No, not really. I find it, Arturo did a good job there of kind of articulating everything. I would say I don't really have the, the business acumen to kind of like really break that down like someone like BJ Bethel would be able to do. But I believe I saw something like apparently like everybody that's trying to go in and buy Warner Brothers Discovery, they're looking to get some backing from Saudi Arabia now, which is interesting. Like how many piles of money do you need at some point? So
there was some
really
interesting. Well, there was some really interesting news breaking on that, where there's some, I forget where I saw it, but there's a news story out that basically the Saudi Wealth Investment Fund was kind of out of money. They were they were not very liquid. Now they deny it, but there's talk that essentially they've been spending on these like projects that are like, I don't know if you're familiar with things like The Line. There's some insane projects they spent money on, which haven't really returned any money. So there's intimation that they're trying to buy stuff that will like give them cash flow, right? So the maybe what's driving that whole story with Trump and then putting in some investment and then kind of like getting into like the sports thing is they're looking for things to get cash, because they're like the wealth investment for itself is tied into all these like crazy ideas that don't have cash flow. So this is kind of why they're kind of all of a sudden more present in all this stuff because of that. But it also kind of raises the question, like there's they're kind of cash strapped and they're already into like some of the stuff for boxing and UFC. So and then like is Saudi mania in trouble, right? Because like the Saudis may like, a lot of the silly investments that they're doing, they may be kind of a little bit strapped for cash. The economy's not doing really well, guys, right? And so like that's kind of part of that, right? But in their case in particular, they've been burning money like a Saudi prince, right? Pardon my kind of like joke, but like, but yeah.
Almost like they've been on tour in America. Anyway, so like one of the other news was Paramount actually. They didn't know about the, you know what's going on in UFC right now with the fixed fights, right? And they had no idea about it before they had put the money in to purchase UFC for Paramount. Do you think that these sort of pratfalls between the UFC thing and then also like I believe you reported, you had posted earlier, Brian, about the shareholders asking for details when it comes to the Department of Justice, Vince McMahon, Triple H, and Nick Khan. I think that's something that you posted about, right?
Yeah, it's regards to the ongoing shareholder meeting where the defendants essentially feel the TKO in good faith didn't actually go through the proper parameters as far as like going through the sale. They basically just kind of forced and pushed the sale to TKO, and there were Thurston's obviously Brendan Thurston at Wrestlenomics has done some great reporting on that. And earlier this week, Brandon noted apparently, I didn't even know what this was, but apparently there was some engagement of a particular app. It's called Signal, which
Oh yeah.
I believe. I didn't know what that was until Thurston actually posted that article earlier in the week. I believe there was conversations in between Paul Levesque, Stephanie McMahon, Nick Khan, just within a particular time frame because the defendants have asked for like all the available information, but obviously since that's like out in the ether, they're arguing, saying they're not providing all the information. So I didn't even know that was a thing until Thurston's article. I didn't even know there was like an app out there where you could just talk about whatever and it just could go away without no
Yeah.
trail.
Yeah, the last time we heard about Signal in the headlines was, of course, when we were reporting about Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth sending messages on Signal, and all these government officials talking on Signals, talking pretty crazy stuff, talking about attacks in other countries and all that stuff. But like it's pretty funny how people who use that app tend to be in these kind of positions, isn't it?
Right.
So it's just that's just part is pretty interesting to me. You know, knowing now that you told me this, Arturo, I didn't find out about today about Saudi possibly being cash strapped. That does add an interesting wrinkle on that $71 billion bid that they were floating out there. That's pretty interesting.
Well, I mean, like I think again, they're looking for things that are going to generate cash. I think it's fascinating to me that like the logic of the lawsuit, right? It's an interesting little tidbit where like a lot of these companies have figured out that it's better to basically pay damages than to ask permission, right? So essentially, they do these like sales and mergers, and this might actually come into play when the Warner Brother thing happens. Where like, I mean, they're taking bids because they're trying to get the price up because they're going to have to explain it to their stockholders. But I would assume the stock will make a choice based on his personal preference, and if the stockbrokers, it'll be a cold calculation. We'll say, hey, if the stockholders sue us because they don't like the bid that we took, then we can pay them damages, and that's cheaper than like not. It's like the utility cost of not choosing what you want versus paying off the stockholders. In WWE's case, it's interesting to me because WWE does seem to be very allergic to discovery. So I'm surprised that this particular suit has gone on this long because they do seem to like eventually settle. So I mean, like I always figured that they were going to pay. For some reason, they're fighting more than I expected. I would fully expect this suit to be settled. They're not going to win, right? I fully expect that they're going to have to pay off the. I'm assuming the stockholders are asking for some fairly large amount, and that's why they're fighting so much.
Well, and then Arturo, like based on what occurred, I'm trying to make sure I phrase this correctly. So when the sale happened, essentially, there wasn't really a lot of cash, like given in. It was more just like absorbing debt, correct?
Yeah, I mean, like if you go, there's a God, I forget. There's this great. I think it's Hollywood Reporter. It's about when Vince came back, right? And so Vince comes back for the sale, and that article basically, essentially, you can intimate that article was ghostwritten by Nick Khan because it's like one of his sources, and he's basically dictating the interior of like the different bids, and he kind of explains why he prefers, essentially, or like whoever the source is explaining why he prefers the Endeavor bid, over the other ones. And obviously, I mean, it's partly because you think, oh, it's a better culture fit, and we'll keep Triple H, and like it's like more. Whereas like they're talking about the Saudis, not necessarily, and like so he had there's a very clear preference. He lays out all the different bids, and there's a very clear preference to what he wants. And kind of the camps, I almost feel like the camp for Comcast was kind of Stephanie, and then you had Triple H on the Endeavor camp. They wanted him, and then like Vince obviously wanted the Saudis, and the Saudis wanted Vince. And so, but it lays out so like I don't believe they made. There's a very real argument that they didn't make the selection in good faith. They didn't get their stockholders the most possible money when doing that, right? They did that because there's some real interest for the people who are in the room in terms of the control that they want and the growth path and where they want to be as a company, right?
Right.
And so again, like this is why the disclosures, they didn't do the full disclosures and they didn't let the voters kind of see that. But there's a lot, I mean, like there's a lot of corporate malpractice and kind of like corruption and stuff going on at the top level. We obviously know there's corruption going on at the top level in WWE's. We know this, right? But again, I think the trick is they made a cold calculation that they were willing to eat this and pay this, and I think some of this. So I think the case that comes to mind is the lawsuit with the UFC and the fighters, the UFC fighters. And the payment lawsuit, which essentially I believe it was Fertitta was the guy who was charged of UFC at the time, and he essentially kind of fell on a sword out of that, and they kind of spun off the company once they did that. And so there's the possibility maybe they're thinking, and people have talked about this, maybe like TKO is going to sell WWE down the line at some point, and maybe kind of the thought pattern on this is like see this out and see what the number is, and if WWE goes in a downturn, this is I want to say this is me speculating based on past behavior. I have no inside knowledge of this. I am just making an educated guess. I'm wondering if they're playing this out, which is not typical for WWE because they hate litigation, they hate discovery. I'm wondering if they're playing this out or TKO is playing this out because if they think they're going to get a large enough damage, you combine the damages with the debt that they have to service, and you combine it with maybe the business is going into a downturn, and maybe we're looking at TKO selling to Saudi next year. Like I'm talking selling WWE to like Saudi or someone, another buyer, more sooner rather than later, because essentially they want to like get rid of like say, hey, we'll sell it to you, but you have to take all the debt and you have to pay the settlement, right? Whatever the settlement is for the sale, right? And it's essentially the same trick that Comcast and WBD is pulling, where they're pulling all their losses into one bucket, right? They're saying, here, linear networks with all the debt, which is kind of why Zaslav and Comcast, like Zaslav doesn't want the linear networks. The linear networks are going to have all the debt, right? So he wants the clear books, and he wants to go back. Probably, I think my explanation is, I think he wants to go back to the mothership, to like Comcast, right? So,
having the clear books off, because like that's why they're bidding strictly on the film and on streaming, because that's where they're having the successes right now. I believe like the films coming from Warner Brothers have been making crazy profits this year.
I think it's a very interesting play because if what BJ was kind of intimating that if they were merging the linear corporations, so we're getting back to them, but again, it's all really kind of the same conversation. If they were merging the linear side, then eventually they could buy it back, right? So it's whatever, they do some manipulation, and then like a couple years down the line, they buy the assets that they like without the debt, right? But essentially, you get it's like you're moving the debt off the books, and I think. Now thinking through this WWE thing, it may be a thing where like they're willing to go to damages because they've done it before. They did it with the UFC, and eventually, as I said, like what they ended up doing was they ended up like divesting the old company and like writing for Tit out. And maybe it's a situation where like they write somebody out and like they sell the asset, right? And it's a really because again, to me. It's the Windhorse thing. I don't know if you're familiar with Brian Windhorse, where he's going like, why would they do that? Right? It's like, to me, it's kind of weird that they've been willing to take this lawsuit as far as they have and like start getting text out there because it's not behavior that WWE typically exhibits, right? As I said, like WWE has been like, I remember the MLW lawsuit. At the point where you get them to discovery is the point where they break out the settlements, right?
Right. Well, it's interesting, Arturo, because like potentially this has like a double jeopardy type of situation because based on what the plaintiffs are actually requesting, and this came from like the latest write up from Thurston, just to follow up, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but essentially the plaintiffs are wanting all federal investigation documents from that January 22 to January 24 timeframe in connection with like their investigations, which obviously ties into like McMahon's alleged sexual misconduct and associated payments. So, and any communications with federal agencies, obviously there was a moment where the feds did obviously go to McMahon's house and got his phone and things like that. So I've thought, maybe there's a possibility where this could kind of like tie over into the ongoing Janelle Grant lawsuit. So, like you said, like if anything is potentially discovered, what are the ramifications of the ongoing Janelle Grant lawsuit? Because if anything else comes to light, that could be very bad for TKO.
I mean, I think let's be blunt here, right? Let's be blunt. Do any of us think that there's a chance that like WWE corporate was acting in good faith and did not commit ethical violations that would violate the expectations of the shareholders? I kind of think there's absolutely, given what we know and given the findings and given everything in terms of the payouts that have broken, I think it's a hard road to prove. I mean, I think this is going to be a question of degree, right? I don't think there's any like WWE is not clean on this, right? I was born at night, but I was not born last night, right? So I can't like come to that. Essentially, this is all about like how much they screw the stockholders, right? I think it's kind of like what this comes down to, which again,
money.
But again, this is really with strange behavior because essentially by like opening this up, you're kind of exposing yourself in a way that, again, like to me, the only reason it's a different, again, I come back to it. It's a different pattern. It's not the same legal pattern. Vince had the same legal representation for years, right? So the corporate culture in WWE is somewhat predictable when it comes to lawsuits. And this is strange behavior unless you take it and put it in the TKO and UFC framework, which is why I'm kind of like going, maybe this is tied to their eventual exit plan. Because they got to be seeing the same numbers I'm seeing for houses. And they got to be seeing the same kind of, we've burned out all the TV partners, right? Because I think behind closed doors, I don't think I think like who's next? Who they're going to build to next? And it starts becoming kind of like stop. And again, I don't think TKO long term is necessarily married to the idea of we must own a wrestling company. So like I'm kind of wondering if this is kind of a prelude, because again, it seems strange to me that they just don't take like, look, why didn't you just take the loss? Like, right. I'm in the marketplace right now. I understand what's going on. Like the economy was tough in 2025, right? And 2025 was a perfect year for you to write off a settlement. Perfect year. Like WWE could basically have like taken the hit, pay out the settlement, write it off in 2025, and start with clean books in 2026. And I am shocked they didn't do that, right? It's a very strange kind of pattern because essentially you companies, and I've repeated this, but companies like put like when you do this, just this is very General Electric mentality. Like sometimes you take this and you analyze this, right? And I'm not saying I did this, but I understand why people would, right? So like they would say like, you have like a sheet. I've known people who do this where they say, if I do this, this is my liability cost and this is what I'm going to pay. And I'm assuming when they did this, right, they understood that they were going to get sued because like this is what if you screw the shareholders on a price, they're going to sue you because they understand that they like there's lawyers who understand that there's a number they can get. So they knew what the payout was going to be, and stretching this out is not going to change that payout, in my opinion. It just gives them further exposure, right? It doesn't. To me, they're basically picking where they're paying this out, and then not taking the hit this year is just really strange. Like I don't see any scenario in which WWE can like logically prove to a judge and jury, right? Like they can't prove to a federal. Like I don't know how they do this. I mean, essentially, right. I believe they're going to pay out. I'm shocked that they've let this stretch out, and which is what has me wondering. Okay, what's going on, right?
Well, you brought up like an interesting point, Arturo. So ideally, do you think, especially if these lawsuits keep on going, and if anything else pops up, the way the launch of ESPN has gone and how lackluster that's been, could you see the TKO asking Saudi to say, hey, would you guys like to just buy this off us outright, and they just call it a day?
Yes, definitely. I mean, like this is kind of what I was hinting at, which is essentially like I think that TKO might already have an exit plan in mind, and it wouldn't be shocking based on some of the other things they did. Like basically, like right off that and put it there. I'm not saying they're going to do that. I'm saying that like it's
The moves
there
they're
because
making sort of make sense as supporting towards going to that point as to get rid of that debt and to sort of get rid of the albatross of WWE because with that WWE
like
does
oh
come this
god, like
lawsuit.
can you imagine the Saudis buy it and the first Raw back we get the Mr. McMahon
Riyadh
thing.
season,
Oh
man.
god, oh god.
Well, and then especially now, since Arturo, you brought up a good point. If there was going to be a check, if you were going to write a check, why didn't you do it at the beginning of the year? And the way
And
the
just write off,
economy,
like basically you write it off, like essentially you take the way you do this kind of thing is they had good earnings. They could have taken the hit in Q4, close fiscal 2025 Q4 with the hit, write it off, and then like start with clean books next year. And it wouldn't have hit like it wouldn't have hit them. I mean, unless they have something in mind where like they want the debt further down the like essentially like I'm saying like they don't want this payout this year. They want this payout in the future. They want somebody else to foot the bill. And again, like I'm coming back to, oh god, Henry Abbott had a really interesting piece. Henry Abbott, old mentor of mine. I used to write basketball blog back in the day. I wrote stuff that like showed up in True Hoop and stuff. So Henry Abbott has a really nice blog. He's writing about like the meeting with Saudi and President Trump, and a bunch of sport properties and sport owners were there, right? So like the Saudi play has always been towards sports. So yeah, I mean, like I think the Saudis kind of being in a place where they want to get more assets to generate cash would fit, and they've shown an interest in WWE 4. I think again, if I had to bet, I mean, I don't know this, right? Again, I do not know this, right? If I had to bet, I would bet that the Saudi offer for WWE was probably the best one.
oh
right?
yeah, for
In
sure.
terms of like
Definitely.
cash, and this is why people went to there's I forget the name of the reporter who said this. I suspect that it was the bid that was winning, but again, I wish I could remember where that piece is. But like it's a pin's about like Vince McMahon coming back for the sale.
Yeah.
And again, it's basically as dictated by Nick Khan, because if you kind of track the guy who's writing the piece, he is the Nick Khan source. He's a guy who Nick Khan goes to with the stories when he needs something polished, anything. So clearly that was the best bid. I think if I remember that piece, that even lays out the numbers on like what the bid was, right? It kind of like gives you a ballpark number. But again, like it's like, oh, sources within like who in WWE, like let's go through the list who would have these numbers. So I'm pretty sure that was the bid. I think like essentially this lawsuit comes down to like the Saudi bid was probably the best one, and essentially like TKO is going to get that bid now, and the stockholders are mad they didn't get the money the first time. They had their right to do. And so yeah, I mean, like I think that it's on the table for me that they buy it out. You mentioned the ESPN app. One thing, I've mentioned this before, I think the whole ESPN thing kind of has proven as we gotten further away from it that I was correct, and ESPN was getting them as a bargaining piece with their carriage negotiations, right? Which we've seen the whole YouTube thing go down, and so yeah, obviously, hey, I had my finger on the pulse on that one. Yeah, Arturo. And I will say that like right now, it's a really interesting thing to me. I think WrestleMania is going to be a disaster for WWE on ESPN, and I keep saying this. And
Really?
because, like, well, okay. So, do you know what happens the same week as WrestleMania?
Is it what day is it on again?
Game 1 of the NBA playoffs.
Oh God, yeah, that's not great.
So that day, so essentially, ESPN has rights.
What
I
are
believe to 8. They have rights. ESPN and ABC have rights to eight Game 1, right? and it might be LeBron's last playoff Game 1, right?
So they're going to be banished to the far corners of ESPN
Let me explain. My running joke on this is like if Jesus came back to life, Jesus comes back, and the only way they're covering it that week on ESPN is to ask him what he thinks about LeBron's last playoffs. I'm serious. Like ESPN, they've given no air to like WWE against college football. They're not giving air. Like there's no way they're giving them air that week. So like they're going to be running this big massive event in the US, and like I don't think their partner network is going to be covering it at all, right? They're not going to get any air on ESPN 1 or ESPN 2.
I think they really overestimated and over leveraged potentially like this clout of being on ESPN. I just don't think that gives you like the cachet it used to, because like who is watching First Take and wants to just watch wrestling all of a sudden?
I mean, I think my running story
I think
on this.
WWE just
my narrative
wanted
on
the.
this is
sorry.
No, my right narrative on this is Comcast wanted out. And I think initially I was like, but why did Comcast want it? I think Comcast wanted out because they were thinking about the merger with WBD. I think Comcast was, why do we need WWE if we're gonna like merge with WBD and own 10% of AEW, right? This is where my brain is going, right? Like, well, allegedly. Okay, let's fine. I'm doing allegedly, but essentially, I think basically Comcast was done. I think at one point Comcast wanted to buy WWE. That fell through. They kept the relationship, but they were essentially done with them as a partnership. And I think they essentially kind of said, "Look, we don't. You know, you can go wherever you want, but you can't stay here." Essentially, because they canceled a bunch of essentially they canceled Saturday Night's main event, and they like moved the pay-per-view forwards. They burned through because they didn't want them there. It's like why was Comcast so
okay
desperate to? But why was Comcast so desperate to burn out the content before certain dates? They wanted to burn out all the content before the split of WBD and Comcast. So why would they want that, right? So essentially they were trying to get ahead of. So essentially, I suspect that they wanted to clear that because they wanted to clear the deck for the merger they wanted to do, which kind of Paramount kind of spiked by trying to come in and buy CNN. But essentially, what I'm saying is like getting back to WWE. So WWE, obviously, Comcast did them a solid by not saying that they were canceling them, right? Oh, we're not going to say that. We're like, oh, we're moving. Fine. And some of them are going to stay on Versant. But like essentially they were looking for a partner. They ran into ESPN. And it was a marriage of convenience because, again, I don't think ESPN was interested in WWE as a product because the way they placed them on the vertical, the way they did the John Cena commercial that mentioned every sport, including like the dog worlds, like the dog body surfing, like everything there except like John Cena's doing a commercial for the ESPN app and not mentioning WWE at all, right? So I don't think it was in their brain. I think essentially they had it there as leverage for the carriage fees. They don't care about the content, and really the way they've treated the content past the first event has kind of shown that, right? And I think that it's going to be really clear. And my biggest, I'm really fascinated by how WrestleMania is going to go because as an NBA guy, as I said, I've written for True Hoop. I've written for a bunch of NBA places. I've been an NBA guy forever. And I was immediately aware, hey, they're going to be running against the first week of the playoffs and like the play-in where LeBron might play in the play-in and there's the whole retirement. So like they're like, unless you move WrestleMania, I don't see how ESPN covers you because if they're not willing to dump like the third string SEC game, right, from ESPN2 to cover that, why in the world would they dump one of their primary properties in NBA for you, right? Like literally, it'd be like trying to like get them to jump Monday Night Footballs. If like it's like imagine if they had the Super Bowl against they wouldn't talk about it. They would talk about the Super Bowl, right? And the Super Bowl is like the biggest property in the draft. The NFL draft is like a big property, but the NBA playoff games with LeBron, huge thing for them.
It's interesting, Arturo, too, because like you mentioned, like the presentation of the product and how ESPN doesn't really care, honestly. Because honestly, when I am watching ESPN, I see more AEW commercials on ESPN, advertising Dynamite, honestly, than actual like whatever the PLE is for the weekend.
They haven't been promoting Survivor Series at all. From what I've been watching, compared to when there was WrestlePalooza and they were covering sort of Raw and SmackDown on like Sports Center and all that. They're doing none of that right now.
This is gonna be really controversial and like somebody but I don't know that anybody in WWE is really a pay-per-view draw right now, right? Because essentially you've been giving away the product like either as a very cheap part of another streaming service or like free essentially for people who have like cable, and now you're going out and asking people to pay. And I think like the numbers we saw from WrestlePalooza was people were just getting a VPN and getting it through Netflix is what they were doing. And like I went through it. They did WrestlePalooza did as well as SummerSlam in Mexico and Canada, right? Which kind of suggests that like the Stephanie thing about using a VPN. Gracias. Stephanie, for like suggesting that. But effectively, I don't know that it's there. And like AEW has actually shown, like essentially one thing that's really kind of interesting, it's a business strategy. So WWE shifted to there's a business to customer strategy. Like there's consumer to business revenue, and then there's business to business revenue. And WWE shifted to a business to business revenue like 6-7 years back, which really is kind of a good strategy for wrestling because it protects you for downturns. And AEW, by necessity, almost had to run on customer to business, right? So they had the TV deal, but they were also having to deal with pay-per-views because they were locked out of venues. So they had to tailor the product for doing pay-per-view running. And they actually, like, if you look at their actual pay-per-view numbers and include that as the part of live tickets, the gap between WWE and AEW is not that hard. In terms of customers ponying up their money for the product, right? If you count chairs and pay-per-view buys, it's actually way closer. And it's really kind of interesting because now that WWE is kind of sitting down and going like, oh, we're going to jack up prices, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to make it harder for you to watch pay-per-view at home and harder for you. We're charging you $5,000 for ringside seats and some silly numbers. And you're doing it in the middle of like what can, we can call it a recession, but we might be able to break out the D word because like they're even hiding kind of the financial numbers. Like the economy is not good right now. So essentially, you're kind of going into a downturn, and you don't really have a lot of proven draws in terms of kind of, again, this isn't ratings, although even ratings are kind of falling, but this is like, okay, getting people to pay for your show, right? And you've also built this culture of people watching everything on YouTube. So it's a really kind of interesting place they've kind of put themselves in. And again, as I said, it's fascinating to watch because, again, I don't think they picked a partner that doesn't care about them other than as a negotiating ploy, is my opinion. Yeah. And really everything that ESPN has done has kind of shown that, like, ESPN could have done a special, right? On ESPN. They could have put it on, like, they could have had them on, like, SportsCenter. Like, I don't know, get, like, Cody on SportsCenter for a week or something.
Right. And it's fascinating, Arturo.
I mean, you think Cody wouldn't do Georgia Tech?
Oh, I'm sure he'd love to do that. So it was an immediate observation on my end that week of the rollout, which honestly I think the rollout in general was just so convoluted and complicated. Like I think about the continued argument Brian and Dave had, but like ESPN had that one kind of media call, right, where they had selective media folks on the call, but then after that, there wasn't like any. That was real. There was a couple ESPN emails I got from their PR team, but other than that, it's been crickets. If WrestlePalooza was going to be a success, right, they would have been doubting it. But I have not received any type. Well,
there's a literal ESPN tweet account that just tweets out ratings numbers for like hockey. Oh, the Division II hockey or the Division II college game did these numbers and ratings, and they've not mentioned WWE at all, which is kind of telling. One thing I was going to say is I think it was I'm trying to figure out if Shapiro or Nick Khan was talking about this, who I think essentially one of the things that people didn't challenge ESPN or WWE on, and I complain about this with everyone who's covering this, which is like, people aren't serious, right? And what I mean by that is they're acting like reporters, but they're acting like marketing people sometimes to reporters. Because when ESPN comes and tells you that, oh yes, it's going to be free on the basic cable tier, right? They said that. They basically intimated that it was going to be free and available. Like WWE was going to be free and available with regular ESPN, and they were going to put it on the cable apps. And I, who read trades, immediately went like, no, you're talking shit. I know how these carriage negotiations went down last time. And the whole thing with YouTube, where it ended up, where I suspect it's going to end up, which I always suspect it was going to end up, is like cable companies are going to say like, no, we're going to give you two tiers, one which will have the ESPN basic app, the old Plus app, and then another tier where you can pay extra, right, and get ESPN Plus. So it was always going to cost you extra a month to get to see WWE pay-per-view, and nothing else is on that app. So essentially, like, ESPN and WBD sold you a bill of goods by saying like, oh yeah, the cable companies will give it to you for free, right? And why would the cable companies give it to you for free? There's no logic to it. And essentially this carriage fight with, when I say carriage, I mean carriage fees and the contract. So this fight with YouTube basically came down to that. YouTube said like, no, like we'll offer it, right? I'm assuming YouTube is going to offer it as a tier, but it's not going to be a basic tier. You're going to have, it's either going to show up on your basic bill or it's going to show up as an extra tier, right?
And then ESPN Unlimited won't be available until 2026. That's what I found out.
Right, but it's probably going to be represented as a price hike, right? So essentially, this idea that it wasn't going to cost you any money, right, was always easily disprovable if you knew anything about that at all. And I understood that they said that. But even if you look at like I was going back to Nikon and Shapiro, we were talking about like, we were told that it was going to be available, right, with basic ESPN. And I know that they're working on clearing it, but they were kind of like intimating that like ESPN kind of lied to them in terms of like what they promised. Now again, they wouldn't say that outright. They would say it a very media person speak. Like anybody who's ever read a press, like these press releases are there's an art to reading like how these people talk. And Nick was kind of, or like I'm trying to remember if it was Nick or Shapiro. I don't remember exactly, but they were basically kind of saying
Shapiro.
They were saying in a very delicate way that the ESPN overpromised and they were disappointed with them doing the clearances to get like they were promised that the product was going to be available in way more homes than it is, right?
That's interesting. I didn't think about it like that.
And again, this is the thing. Like when people kind of said, ESPN is a great partner, I'm like, but you understand that what's happening here, it isn't ESPN. It's this new streaming service. And it was really funny. I made a point of this, and people was like, you know that the WrestlePalooza and the events have been going out in 720p, right? So if you get the pay-per-view on ESPN, which you're paying $30 a month for, right? You're getting it in resolution from like 2010. Right?
Oh wow! Okay.
You're getting like 720p, where like I'm watching these AEW pay-per-views in 4K and like Dynamite and like HDR. Like okay, so like it's I was watching this. Like it's funny when like WrestlePalooza was the same weekend as CMLL, and even CMLL had like a really beautiful stream. And I'm like going like, guys, you cannot come to this ball. Like, and again, to be clear, if you watch it on Netflix, Netflix is really nice pictures. The cameras are there, so they have the good cameras. It's just the infrastructure of the ESPN is kind of shit because ESPN's not set up for this, right? Again, it is a basic ass streamer that is not set up for what you're doing. Peacock, and again, full disclosure, I used to work for General Electric, so I was in the same company as Peacock and Comcast and whatnot. But the setup for Peacock, the cameras they have, and the setup for streaming they have, which is set up for the Olympics and all these games, is gorgeous. I watch Premier League games on Comcast, on Peacock all the time, and like, good lord, like anything, or like I'll watch surfing for the Olympics, or anything I watch, or whatever I watch on Peacock, sports, it's absolutely gorgeous, right? Like same thing with HBO, same thing with like and that makes you look good. And I think that like it's really kind of interesting to me that really WWE in the US now for their pay-per-views has the shittiest stream, right? It makes them look low rent, because again, if you compare them to the Amazon Prime feed or the HBO feed, or I forget who CML was on, like the other feeds that I'm getting are much higher quality. And again, this isn't a dig at WWE, who has the cameras at these events that are really good, because you can see it on Netflix and you can see it on the international feeds, but the US feeds are not good, right? And that's down to the partner. And I think that like Comcast was an extremely good partner, right?
Yeah.
And I think for AEW, HBO has been a fantastic partner, right? Yeah. And having someone in your corner who knows how to do this, right, is really good. And it's actually kind of funny because like if you go back, like it's really kind of weird not to have WWE associated with like WBD and Comcast or HBO, because I still remember, like I'm an old man. I remember watching MSG and like the HBO feeds, like WWE on HBO in like the late 70s and early 80s. I had a friend who had I had the rich friend who had cable, right? And I'd go to his house at the satellite shit, and had the big satellite. We could watch we can watch wrestling. Like he had the old like consoles at home, which is like really cool. But the point being that like it's really kind of interesting how WWE has gone from being the clear leader in like video quality, right, to no, they're not the leader in like the product delivered to the home, right? And again, this is I'm not digging on the Netflix stream. The Netflix stream is pretty, but if you look at the entirety of the product, that's kind of rough now.
Hey Arturo. So I was perusing on X, and I saw that one Mr. Thurston of Wrestlenomics had referenced us, specifically you. So what was that about?
Okay, so the story on that is, are you familiar with the Andy? I don't know if everyone's familiar with the Andy Nemedy breakdown of the big data streaming for Nielsen, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, the Nielsen change is the old panel data, which is they have little boxes in people's houses, and they do that. And now they have that combined with what they call a big data model. Now, the big data model is a big, huge machine learning product. I'm a data scientist, so I know what this, like, it's a big, huge regression equation with a thousands and thousands of variables, and they calculate it and they train it to behave like the panel, right? And so he broke it down and he said, look, when we look at the calculation they're doing for wrestling, we suspect there's going to be this issue, which is there's an old issue where, like, when a TV is on, the way this stuff works is that the system that's monitoring you is sensing your cable box. And it assumes that if you don't interact with your remote control for 90 minutes, right, your TV is off, right? It has no... So that, in essence, the way they used to do that is live sports and wrestling would get exempted from that, right? Because what happens is you sit down, you're watching a football game, you're watching Dynamite, you're watching Raw, you put the TV on, you leave it on commercial, you stand up and get a beer or something, you like get some food, walk around, go to the, you know, if you get to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. You're not changing the channel, you're not raising the volume, you're leaving it on. A lot of fans do that. I'm a guy like, I'll put the channel on, I'm not going to change it. At worst, I'll put it on background or something, maybe get a second TV going for a basketball game or something, which I did this week. It's like, oh, wow, Celtics and Dynamite, like whatever. But I'm not changing the channel. And
same about your Mavericks
essentially,
there, Brian, with Exxon being out for the season. I think he's out for the season, right?
Yeah, weird circumstance, and the fact that they're hard capped and they can't even like sign any new players. That's not ideal.
That's crazy.
But the point was that if they were, so the expectation was because it was 90 minutes, you were going to start seeing a bias and the numbers were going to drop, and it did. Now, there was an argument about whether these are real numbers and no, like, oh, we've been measuring this wrong forever. And essentially what the data scientist analysis was like, no, it's not that you've been doing it wrong forever. It's that when they trained the machine learning model on the data, they trained it wrong, right? And so the analysis that Brandon Stroud did was he looked at the panel data and the new big data, the machine learning model, and compared it. And so one of the really interesting things when you compare it, he compared it side to side and look at the gaps. And you want to know what the only time there was only one data point in all the data that he looked at where the big data beat the old panel data, right? It was the collision that ran as the third hour of Dynamite, so it was 60 minutes, and it never went over 90 minutes. It was 67 minutes, actually. So the one data point in the data set where like the 90-minute turnoff wouldn't be an issue was the only one, where the numbers went up, right? What does that tell you? What does that suggest? And so, like, the question I asked him was like, hey, looking at this data, I said, if you look at this data, the one point you have that's under 90 minutes that doesn't hit the exemption for turning off the TVs is the one where the big data and the machine learning, the old panel data and the machine learning model match. And so he talked to the head of the regulatory agency that oversees for the advertisers, who oversees Nielsen, like literally the CEO of that regulatory body, and explained it to him. And he said, yeah, well, I wasn't aware of it, but I'm going to include that now. And the data is actually really interesting. But if you look at it, Andy Nemedy did also, and Brandon, and actually questioned Nielsen. And if you look at the data, again, it's data scientists. If you look at it over time, it looks like the gap between big data and the old data is shortening, like somewhat like they were retraining the model. Because what you do is when the data doesn't come out what you want, you keep training the model until you get what you need to get, right? So it looks like Nielsen is working to correct it. So the whole story is about, oh, hey, the data was off. Well, no, it does seem like it was an artifice of, or it seems like it may have been an artifice of the way Nielsen trained their model, right? And which is the lesson to be learned here is if you know something, right, and you've been running this and has been working a certain way for 50 years, and you run it to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT all of a sudden says, you know what, 2 + 2 is 5, right? You shouldn't go, wow, 2 + 2 is 5. You go, wait a second, are you sure? Can you cite a source for that?
That's crazy, man.
It's like, so essentially you have to, like, when you're working with it, and I know this, again, I'm a data scientist. I work with AI. I know that, like, when you get a weird result from AI, what you got to do is you got to double check that stuff because it makes mistakes and makes assumptions. Officially that's called the hallucination. You call it. The word is the model starts hallucinating. Well, in this case, it looks like the model was hallucinating, and it looks like Nielsen again because Andy Nemedy told them, and then like we've kind of pressed them. It looks like they've been retraining it. So you start looking at the Dynamite numbers. The Dynamite numbers over time, especially that last week, start closing where the big data and the normal data is the same. So I mentioned this to Brandon. Brandon took it, and it does look like, again, he has the regulatory body. So it does look like Nielsen's going to have to like work to make the data correct. Now, what's interesting is even in the fixes that they've done, the fixes have affected the Collision and the Dynamite numbers, but not the SmackDown numbers, which is kind of like a really interesting thing because that does suggest that like. But again, I think we kind of one thing I've actually talked about. I've been talking about ratings and like this. And I've been doing numerical analysis on this for a long time, and the composition of viewers for Dynamite and for like AEW and WWE is different. And I think the other part is I think the other elephant in the room is we believe, and BJ covered at one point. I've looked at it. I think Dave has come around on this too. I suspect that there's either the same amount of people watching on HBO, like essentially, like given the way the TVS has fallen in subscription and HBO has risen, there's a lot of suspicion that a lot of people are watching on HBO, and even on the polls that people have taken informally, we kind of think that everyone's got most people like or. There's a similar amount of people watching on HBO, and the people watching on HBO are more likely to be in the demo, right? Because nobody has TBS and like 30, like the coverage for TBS in the demo for 18 to 49 is like 32% of the country, and the one for HBO is like hugely high. And like the thing with HBO, and I've said this before, is if you have HBO, you use HBO, right? Like my mom has HBO, my mom watches HBO, my dad, right? My 78-year-old dad like knows to watch stuff on HBO. He also knows to watch stuff in Korean channels, but that's a whole other story. But the point being like essentially like the lesson here, right? And again, this goes back to like you have to kind of like ask the experts, and God bless Andy Nemedy for like taking the time to act like a data scientist. When a big data model comes back with an answer that is different than 50 years of established polling and science, you should question the big data model, not the established science. It's essentially kind of the this is like we gotta like I think I want people to just take things with grains of salt and like kind of like double source this stuff. And I think like maybe I'm asking for a little bit too much rigor, but I mean again, God bless Andy Nemedy for asking these questions. God bless Brandon for following it up, and God bless like kind of like people kind of like pay attention and kind of question this, because I do think it was a tempest in a teapot, right? I think that like yes, the numbers were lower, but everything suggested there was an issue with the model, not with the numbers. Like people didn't disappear all of a sudden, right? Like the AEW didn't stop selling pay-per-views all of a sudden. It's kind of like a good like attendances didn't disappear for WWE all of a sudden. So thanks, Doc, for like sending me off on this diatribe about like data science. Yay.
Hey man, I always like when we get referenced everywhere else. It always makes me pop because I love taking credit for things because it's what I like to do is to tout myself. But it's just the science matches the numbers, and you always gotta follow the numbers. I'm gonna put a pause. Hope you enjoyed the first portion of the show where we covered some news, but to the meat of the matter, Brian Zilem had written the article called "Behind the Curtain: Wrestling's Crisis of Performer Safety and Human Trafficking Awareness." This following portion of the episode might be triggering for some people. There might be some language used and some situations described that could be triggering for some people, could be seen as and it's difficult to talk about, but I feel like it's very important to talk about. I'm gonna read some comments. I know I read some on there on the show, but I think it'd be important to read these beforehand, just so you can just hear these comments as they were. First, I have Keela of The Rap. You can catch her on Fight Game Media. She had written, "The definition of sex trafficking is very important because it has multiple meanings. I'm glad that was pointed out. Everything comes down to power and control. Having safeguards in check is important to foster a safe work environment for talent. Clear protocols should be explicitly stated on every major wrestling promotion's corporate website, detailing the steps taken to foster a safe working environment. HR training should be in place to ensure that people have a safe space to express their feelings and concerns. If harassment takes place behind the scenes, listen, act, pay attention. It's time to dead the carny aspect of the business once and for all. Absolutely powerful stuff. And next, we thank you for that. Thank you for that, Keela. That was very powerful stuff there. I definitely agree and see where you're coming from. Next, we have Trish of the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. Brian has highlighted that abuses of power remain and that structures of wrestling continues to push a culture of silence where hierarchy decides whether someone will be deemed responsible or not and will challenge any attempt of change. A number of wrestlers and officials will highlight that the business has progressed from previous decades, but not how far behind it is on general workplace culture, and safeguarding it is to most other industries in the world. I am proud of him for the work he does highlighting such issues across the industry. Definitely. You do great work, Brian. You do great work. Thank you for that, Trish. Keeping it a little bit international, I have this comment from Sarah of Waffy Bollocks. Please listen to Sarah on Waffy Bollocks. As Sarah and MJ do great work there. Sarah writes, I think that the article makes some great points and suggestions, and it does seem necessary for the bigger promotions, especially to step up and lead the way. But I'd be widely out of my depth talking about it. I don't know anything about the actual real world of the wrestling business. And, that's great. That's great to point out. We're not really privy to everything going on there. And, a little bit of self-deprecation there, Sarah, but, I appreciate it. Next, we have Matt, my partner in the host of Deathmatch Royalty, where we call some of the best death matches, hardcore matches, whatever you want to say. Matt is a stud. And one of the best podcasters. Let's go, Matt. This is an issue we see across many different landscapes in wrestling. We often see cases of abusers being protected and sort of just being given preferential treatment. It is a situation that shouldn't be happening. And it seems like getting rid of the bad actors is such a small ask. Yeah, definitely feel that. Thank you, Matt, for that. And again, please, catch Keela on the Wrap, catch Trish and Sarah on the Trish and Sarah Show, catch Sarah on Waffly Bollocks, catch Matt on Deathmatch Royalty. Thank you for weighing in on that. A couple of my favorite podcasters out there. And now a couple of my friends are commenting. I take this from Rambones, who, he does work in some social services kind of ways, and I feel like getting his account would be great. He writes, strong power differentiates and rigid hierarchies are associated with the conditions which permit exploitation and abuse to be prevalent. Accountability and transparency are keys to avoiding those problems. The biggest key is that we need to listen to survivors, the majority of whom are women and children who are typically devalued by our society. Solidarity with survivors matters. Yes. We need to support those who've gone through these sort of issues, who've gone through these abuse, who face these things that nobody should have to. I agree with you, Rambones. Great stuff there, man. And this comes from my friend Midnighter. She writes that the article raises good points. Most importantly, it has to come from the top. So much of it is rotten precisely because Vince killed opposition and had all that going on. Yep. Short to the point. Yeah. Definitely that's something to keep in mind. Next I have Cottonmouth, aka Resident Max Caster Appreciator. Shout out to you, Cotton. Check out her art. The idea of people having to keep silent to keep the peace in wrestling is ridiculous, especially when it comes to abuse. In a business where you have to trust people with your life, why would you have to play nice with someone that's a walking red flag? It feels like the idea of keeping mum is a disgusting holdover from the concept of the old boys club. Look at the current WWE scandal, seeing how many people were failed outright should be a clarion call to straighten up. For some, it's just another opportunity to be just as terrible. Finally, I have a comment from Lady B. Shout out to you, Lady. You're great. You're great. She writes, Brian's article lays out concrete solutions, third-party reporting, annual training, survivor resources. These aren't radical demands. These are basics that exist in virtually every other industry. Wrestling's biggest problems isn't the allegations. Every industry has bad actors. It's the response. It's the institutional refusal to implement basic safeguards that every other entertainment industry has had for decades. As a female fan, I'm tired of being told to separate the art from the artist. I'm tired of, well, it's just wrestling as an excuse for enabling abuse. And I'm tired of companies treating basic human safety as optional. I'm right there with you, sis. These are definitely harrowing experiences that I know a lot of people have had. And coming to this as someone who was a union representative, someone who was a union steward, someone that always strive for having a safe work environment. Wrestling is so behind the times of everything here. And I want the wrestlers and those employees that work there to feel like they can go somewhere and they don't have to go to work in fear of reprisal. It's just something that means a lot to me. And yeah, please, Brian's gonna come up right now. Me and Arturo do this interview him about his article. Please, just listen, enjoy. It's what we do. Okay, and we're back here, and I'm talking here with the incredible Brian Zilem, and I'm using my serious voice right now because what he wrote about really hit me in my feelings because his article that came out today on Post. Go to postwrestling.com. Shout out to you, Wei. Wei called me the fourth Asian American wrestling podcasting pillar, so I'm always going to be having respect for Wei. But yeah, so Brian had written over on postwrestling.com his article, Behind the Curtain, Wrestling's Crisis of Performer Safety and Human Trafficking Awareness. And this has been a project you've been talking about for a while, and something that you've been like proud of. And I got to tell you, man, when I read this morning, it was something that really hit me as like someone. I'm a union man. I was a union steward where I was at, and like when I think about pro wrestling and like the power discrepancies between the workers and management, it's really because one of the it's really something to think about because there's always going to be the power discrepancy. And one of the quotes that I pulled from your column that really hit me was, "You can't fix power imbalances from inside the same structure that created them." My first episode of The Prescription, I had done it with Trish and Sarah, where we went over the speaking out because it affected pretty much everyone in pro wrestling, British pro wrestling essentially. But our thing was that we had come to was it comes from the top. If the top company excuses this kind of behavior, whether it be abuse of talent, or or the Janelle Grant thing, where she was an employee being trafficked by Vince McMahon for his own sexual exploits and possibly being sold to other people to be exploited. And this is something that's important. And also, what I loved in this article that you covered was that human trafficking doesn't necessarily have to be as dramatic as you put it in your article as the movie Taken. But I believe the person you had talked with who works at I believe they worked at the Central Texas Coalition Against Human Trafficking, said that that's often a misconception about what human trafficking is. And I want you to go ahead and go ahead with that, because I believe that article that you wrote is very important, especially in today. And we got that report today from the Department of Education, trying to make sure that these professional degrees, such as physician assistants, nurses, are not beholden to make reports of abuse anymore. That's what's new here. They're no longer forced to make reports of abuse. So I think it's very pertinent. Your article is very timely and it's very important. So yeah, I want you to go ahead and speak on it.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate it. Absolutely. And, obviously, like, one of the main reasons I wanted to kind of pursue this, obviously it wasn't anything that I spat out overnight. That this definitely took several weeks and months of kind of research, reaching out to the right people, understanding who would potentially obviously want to speak to me directly, doing some research on potentially maybe a situation that was brought up. Very obviously grateful I had the opportunity to speak to Rachel Rose, lovely lady, incredible story, courageous, just very fortunate she gave me the opportunity just to obviously speak with her and have her just retell her story. The main reason I was I wanted to really kind of pursue this is because conversations around safety in wrestling is often heat up during like scandals, and then it like it disappears, which I kind of like outlined in Rachel's initial kind of like stories, right? And where it became a situation where I think it like actively bothered me when if you guys remember when Brock Lesnar returned this summer at SummerSlam, there was this huge misconception on like what the understanding of what cleared is, because basically once it really ran rapid once on Wrestling Observer Radio when Dave Meltzer said Brock Lesnar was cleared, and a lot of bad faith pundits were articulating that as, oh well, Dave said Brock is cleared, so he's good to go. Technically Brock Lesnar is not accused of anything, but if you take a step back and analyze it, he is named in the ongoing Janelle Grant lawsuit against WWE 44 times, and essentially he is like an eyewitness. Essentially,
I will
good.
basically. I want to make a point on Brock, which is whatever you think about the Janelle Grant thing with Brock. Let me mention that he's also famously part of the plane ride from hell.
Yes.
Right. So before we kind of let's gloss over some of the stuff. I think in the context of this conversation, I think that like essentially Brock has a kind of pattern of behavior which suggests that he is not someone who is I'm not gonna I mean like he's someone who may not be ideal for a locker room, particularly one where there's clearly not good safeguards for this kind of behavior.
Right.
And I say that because, and I said this at the time when the whole thing happened with Vince and everything was revealed, really a sane corporate culture would have cleared house with HR, right? And and much respect to Bruce Pritchard. I've liked your podcast, I listened to your podcast, but you were the former head of HR at One Talent Relations. And anybody who's been talent relations for that company really should not be in a position of booking or control for wrestlers in the modern era, right?
Yeah, because we say boys will be boys. I think that was the term that that Jim Ross used in the episode.
It's very tricky because essentially, like, again, some of this, and I've been part of this, and I one of the first companies I worked at had this 50s hidebound culture, right? And some of the stuff that went on was really, and I was coming from like, fresh face. I was coming for like the government. I was working for the federal government. My first job, and I come to Puerto Rico and work at this company that had like HR from the 50s.
Wow.
And I'm not going to go into some of the stuff that happened, but it was kind of really shocking to me. And then, it was part of like, and HR was shifting there in real time, and I was watching it as it happened. And I think that some of that, there's going to be a culture shift for these companies, and it has to exist, but you have to at least show that you're trying, right? And I think that, like, I would very much, given the behavior of what we have a culture that doesn't, at least in the principal company in the U.S., I can make the statement that I don't think that culture has like been fixed at all or been addressed at all. And in fact, like it's been enabled in my mind because essentially there's been no consequences. And if we want to start talking about how there've been particular angles where they made fun of the General Grant thing, which really is not something that helps to feed a healthy culture. There's no consequences.
Right.
Really.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Arturo. I call that out like in the section of like towards kind of like towards the end of the article, and it's you hit the nail on the head because that's why I think about that Royal Rumble scrum a lot, because that was obviously 48 hours after the initial lawsuit was filed against, at the time, Vince McMahon, WWE, and John Laurinaitis, who's not part of the lawsuit anymore at this time. But I think about what was asked of Triple H and how he was pressed on information, and there was really never any follow-up on anything. And I thought the question Cameron Hawkins asked, not just because he's, a good friend of mine, but I thought it was a great answer because, in that situation, in that time, because I believe consecutively it was I believe it was Alba, Thurston, and then Cameron Hawkins consecutively asking, Paul Levesque really pertinent questions at the time. And then, of course, I think towards the end, Levesque was asked a very easy question about the Attitude Era after that, which, and then he kind of like, he was able to get off the hook for that. But my ultimate, thing with like the structure, the culture, it's never really been addressed because it's always been the atmosphere of, like you mentioned, Arturo, Paul Heyman's basically, going on Errol Hawani and saying, "Oh, you woke people don't like Brock Lesnar coming in. Well, that's too damn bad." Is basically what he said on Errol Hawani, and it's and then and I don't know if it was a week later, 2 weeks later, Paul, he basically referenced, he didn't directly say the lawsuit directly, but he basically dismissed the Janelle Grant lawsuit as a rumor or conspiracy on live television. Which
I think what I would, and here's we're gonna get into like some of the like. If you are you familiar with the details on the case of Nancy Argentino?
No.
So the details on the case of Nancy Argentino, she was basically Jimmy's like I want to be polite about this because essentially she was the person like I don't want to say, but there's intimate like would you talk about trafficking and how it was handled, and like kind of she was the woman they had for. I mean, obviously she was kind of in a relationship with Jimmy, but it gives a lot of vibes of like this is the woman they were kind of like. There's a lot of kind of their she's trapped in a relationship that's very abusive and physically abusive, and they're kind of like using her to manage kind of Snook, and it's a really kind of like shitty thing. Wow. And then obviously the whole thing when he kills her, and again I think obviously at this point we're not going to kind of like go into that, but allegedly kills her, fine. And then how the whole culture around covering up this incident, plus other incidents that have gone on throughout the history of the company. We have Tony Atlas on tape talking about being sexually harassed by the Booker, right? In WWE, and like a lot of stories about the Ring Boys, and a lot of stories about like all the payoffs.
Another case still ongoing that we forgot to mention.
Where we talk about Ashley Massaro. We bring up like,
Brock Lesnar, right? We bring up Brock Lesnar, but we also got to bring
his
up
wife.
Sable's.
What about the payout for his
WWE?
wife? Yes. Essentially, the problem lies in the fact that like there is a long-term culture of rot in this company, and specifically, I'm talking about the industry leader here because I think like that trickles down, and they have not addressed it in any way, and they haven't changed kind of the people who are managing the system, right? So they haven't given any indication, and even cursory, that they're kind of trying to evolve past that. And I think that like that's why I think the bar is in hell for this, right? And as you're saying, like it's like you can't. I mean, I'm obviously not a woman, but I know that like if I was, I don't know that I feel comfortable like making any sort of accusation in this company. Right. Because essentially,
I
can't
will
imagine, but like,
I will say, I feel like Shawn Michaels, I believe at the time, I'm paraphrasing, there was a circumstance where somebody did ask him about a code of conduct or something to that nature, and he was very upfront and even asked, whoever asked us a pertinent question, he was more than happy to send them an updated code of conduct, which I think I appreciated. At
honestly,
least
to give HBK credit, I think of the answers that WWE has had and the people who've actually like taken that. In that case, he referred a code of conduct. He talked about in-house training. He did at least it made me feel that at least there was some level of effort from his end. That's not the same thing I get from Paul and the top and the main roster. I do feel like. Which, I mean, it makes some sense because you have a lot of maybe more external people coming in and a lot more kind of like, I would say that like people who are, like, you talk about culture and cults, right? And I think by the time you get to the main roster, you're kind of very much in insider. It's almost like being an insider for Scientology. And that's the whole topic. So essentially, I think that like it makes more sense for them to be like more progress or like more robust system wise at the PC level.
Right.
Actually, like one thing that I might invite people to look for. There's I wish I knew where it was. There's a shoot interview with Roddy Piper talking about like the kind of harassment he faced of this type.
Oh, right. Yeah.
As he was coming up. So this is not just like to the women and the female performers. This is also to the male. I think, and I said we have Tony Atlas on tape, on the record, on WWE talking about this kind of stuff.
Also, so Randy Orton's uncle,
not isolated.
Right? I think Randy Orton's uncle talked about it also, right? He was on sadly Jesse Raphael talking about that. I do want to say this because they had retweeted your article. Please, if you really want to dig into the Janelle Grant lawsuit, besides going to Post Wrestling, they have really great coverage of it. I always feel that female voices should be heard when covering this kind of stuff. So Absolutely. Please check out the Power Bombshells, Sam Shipman, Mel Gray, friends of the show. Great podcast. And Sam does a lot of writing and did a lot of coverage on the Janelle Grant case at large. Um, Possibly at the end of the show, you're going to hear some comments from these from other people, but I did have, I've been sharing your pretty much your column everywhere, right? So I do have a little bit of comments from other shows, other podcasters, other people in the wrestling media space who had responses to it. So the first one I'm going to read comes from my friend Sarah from Waffly Bollocks. Catch them every week from the UK. She says, I think the article makes some great points and suggestions, and it does seem necessary for the bigger promotions, especially to step up and lead the way. Which, this is also something that I talked about with Trish from Trish and Sarah on my first episode, where it really comes from the top, and the top being WWE. And when this sort of behavior is sort of exercised and keeps happening in the largest company, why do it smaller independent shows have to follow suit? I'm kind of happy though that we don't really see this in other companies. Well, maybe it's just not reported.
Well, I would not say that.
Yeah,
I would not.
I wouldn't say we don't see another company. I say like it's the same thing where we
don't make me look up some shoot interviews from certain famous performers from when they were in ROH.
Oh yeah,
talking
yeah,
about some shitty things they did to female performers.
Yeah, let me not say that. Let me say that we do.
Let me not get a bunch of like holy cows in trouble for like some of the stuff
you meant there's nothing privy in the public eye that we are currently aware of.
Yeah, I mean is it's not really as public as it is with WWE. I'm happy that it's public with WWE at this point. But as to what Arturo was saying, this is like generations of this sort of behavior sort of being brushed aside. And from WWE at the top, when it's accepted at that point, it sucks that no other companies seem to want to clean up themselves. So they're just going to follow suit about what the bigger companies do. Right. One of the other comments I got comes from Keela of The Rap. Also, you can find her at Fight Game Media. Her feedback goes, the definition of sex trafficking is very important because it has multiple meanings, and I'm glad that was pointed out. Everything comes down to power and control. Having safeguards in check is important to foster a safe work environment for talent. Clear protocols should be explicitly stated on every major wrestling promotion's corporate website, detailing the steps taken to foster a safe working environment. HR training should be in place to ensure that people have a safe space to express their feelings and concerns. If harassment takes place behind the scenes, listen, act, pay attention. It's time to dead the carny aspect of the business once and for all. This comment is tremendous. Thank you so much, Keela, for that.
I think one thing I want to say, and I'm going to reach out a little bit to like older fans maybe who are listening to this and maybe are like a little bit hidebound about this. And know it's the way it's always been. Look, if you want wrestling to survive as a business, right? If you want wrestling to continue into the future, I think that it's important that we have a space where people who are talented, right, both male and female, feel comfortable that they can come in and ply their craft. And I think I've argued about this, and I think that's eventually it's one of the major arguments to me. Like I think at some point we need a union for the to kind of like I've explained to people that where you get unions, right, where unions happen, right, in sports and performance, generally has to do with pensions and safety. These are the two things that drive the formation of unions, right? It's when the retired performers are not being treated properly or they're unsafe work conditions, and that leads people to unionize. And I think that some of that would be helpful because it would lead to the workers, the wrestling, like setting some parameters. Like I'm talking like things like the kind of things that you would have for the screen actors, like the kind of things you would have on a set. This is not different from conditions that you would have on a set in a theater. You have some expectations of safety and like, you want to have some process so that, again, we can get talented people to come into the space, right? If we want the space to continue to survive and maybe have some growth, then we need to like put some light into the space, and that will be helpful because essentially, if you're a carny shop where nobody, and again, I know they're not necessarily, they're probably a little bit disturbing too, maybe because I mean, if you go watch Roddy Piper talk about this, go watch some of your favorites, male and female, talk about the kind of things that happen. It's not hard to find. I think I've seen Shamrock talk about this kind of thing too, right? Like there's people out there surprisingly who will talk about look up Ashley Mazzaro, look about like a lot of things and how performers are treated. And I think that like, and I say this like the same way I would, one of my causes with one other younger man was like, I wanted to get like college athletes paid. Mm-hmm. And I thought that we would never win. And when I say that, like one of my mentors, Dave Barry, was a guy who's, a famous sports economist. He's gone on, was a material witness in the Northwestern athletes trial. I helped him gather data to help make the case for the stuff. And we never thought we were going to win, right? We thought there was no chance in our lifetimes we get like college players paid. But effectively, I think one of the things that we argue about this is like, look, these guys are killing themselves, right, for our entertainment. And I know they get joy, but they're like, if you get joy from watching college athletics and you get joy from watching wrestling, then you should be invested in making sure that the performers have a safe space to perform and are taken care of, like when they work and when they retire, right? Like, these people are like, imagine like, it's like the old thing where like the football players would die when they're 50. Or the NFL players, and we want to make sure that like, I mean, I think I owe it to them to try to, hey, can we get this space for the men and for the women to be a safe space? And I mean, I think that's my argument to like the old hidebound. Think about your own workspace, right? Think about the place you work, and think about the things that you take as a given, the OSHA requirements, and kind of like you're not going to get harassed at work, and you have certain expectations in terms of how you get protected. And a lot of these people who are like killing themselves for your entertainment don't have those protections available. And I think like from an argument of human decency, I'm saying like, look, if you enjoy these guys and you love them and the performers, then you should support them getting like decent workplace conditions, right? I don't think this is like a really hard ask. And again, the other part is like, if you get that, then you're more likely to get these guys to have long productive careers and then like be like long productive people and be able to meet them when they're like 50 or 55 at a convention and talk to them, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the way I would appeal to the fans who are listening to this. And I think to the wrestlers, I think one thing is like, I think David Otunga did a conversation around like forming a union.
I saw that.
He was surprised at the response.
Friend of the show, David Otunga. I just want to say that. Friend of the show.
Yeah, and I said like, I'd love to talk to him if you got like, but like I said like, I think that he was surprised by the response he got, but I'll say this again. I think where the rubber meets the road on this, and if you look at the history of the Major League Baseball Players Union, of the NBA Union, of the NFL Union, it was always work conditions, health, and pensions. These are the three things. And when you get things like, I forget his name, Rich Holland, getting fired, right, for going on, like TNA. WWE sent him to TNA, for no extra pay, he gets hurt, and that is really not appropriate, right? No, and I understand that he may think it's an uphill battle, but maybe it's one that needs to be fought. And I understand that when I say that is because think about who is in the White House, right? Not Trump. I'm talking about Linda McMahon, right? He was like having like shareholders of the corporation, like being in places of power. But I think like, again, you have to have these fights because like if you look at the history of sports and when people got paid, it was always around this kind of thing where like somebody is taking a risk and the company who is supposed to cover that, your employer who's asking you to do this, wants to squirrel out, and that should offend people, right? This is why we have like safety regulations. Like this isn't him like lying about this. We know that he got hurt on the WWE dime, and we should want him to like. And I'm using hurt, but again, we have a lot. Again, I mentioned Ashley Massaro. I'm not going to get into that detail, but there's a lot of cases where like. And again, in the case of like, I'll mention a little bit of that. Like, she was going on a kind of like entertain the troops, a USO tour, essentially.
Right.
So she's doing this thing, a goodwill tour to entertain the troops, right? And she has this experience. Again, I'm not going to get into the detail, right? But like, not my story to tell. You can find it. But she has this traumatic experience that destroys her life, right? And she was not well taken care of by the industry. And I think that what we want is to get to a position where, like, these are people who are good people, who are, suffering for entertainment, who get like basic conditions. Like we're not talking about like I said, we're not talking about exceptional. We're talking about like no, just get them the basic kind of protections you would get like on a movie set or a TV set. Like if you were working in like the local news, you would get basic protections that these people don't get, right? And I think we want to the wrestlers, we want to get them these kind of protections. And I think like some of that is going to be like you talk about being union steward. I do think that there's going to have to be some organization at some point because I think, particularly with the amount of money that we're talking about, not having a union has cost wrestlers in the hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Like if we go from the time when Hogan prevented a union from forming, when Jesse Ventura was trying to get off the ground, that's been what that's easily billions of dollars in wages that have been lost to this, right? And people will think I'm exaggerating. Go look at the earning reports for WWE and use that as your baseline, and consider that like the major sports in the U.S., typically the athletes get 50% of revenue, right? So
I do want to hit this part on it because there was this part where you talked about the wrestler she was learning under Booker T at Booker T school, right? And she went through all the right processes of reporting the guy who was harassing her, to the point where he brought a gun to the school and following her everywhere, stalking her. And when she brought it up, all of a sudden she got called a troublemaker, a headache, and she wasn't booked anymore. And like when you go through like all the correct routes and you're punished for that and you're deemed a headache, and I think because we keep referencing the plane ride from hell, right? One of the things that disturbed me is Terry Runnels, ex-wife of Dustin Rhodes, the thing she did. No, because I'm gonna bring up Brock Lesnar. Allegedly, Brock Lesnar had flashed her his penis, and Dustin told her the best thing she could do was not sell it. Don't sell it. Don't sell it. Don't react. It's gonna get worse if you react. Could you imagine that in a real life, in your workplace, where someone exposes themselves to you and you're the correct action is to not do anything? This is pro wrestling. Like, and when you go to the guy that you're supposed to report to and he reports back, and you get punished for reporting it, you're really stuck being powerless, and that's what sucks. It's really disturbing how this can be getting away with in show business, and wrestling is show business. And that's just like something that I think should be.
I mean, we have this everywhere. I mean, I think ultimately, you want. This is why I come back to like I do think it's eventually going to come down to the wrestlers organizing, because obviously, I think having that negotiation power will help them set that precedent and set like the safety precautions in place, right? And it's not. Again, counting on these companies are not ethical and moral beings, right?
No.
Their corporations have certain things that they want, and they're not necessarily like it's the people who are there. And essentially, I do think in this kind of situation, if you want your interests protected, you do have to set yourself up to negotiate to get that, particularly with the amount of money that we're talking about here. And particularly with like some of the actors that were kind of in the space who have a reputation for not being, let's call them not the best employers, right? Track record stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm being very polite and being generous here, but like essentially what I'm saying is like, I think it's an important thing that we got to keep hitting on. I think that it's part of, we're getting to a point now where we have real women, a real women's division, I would say, in U.S. wrestling now with how AEW works, right? But I do think that there's a maturity levels in organization that I think that, like, and again, I think they're the startup problem, but I do think that they maybe could take some of the lead on this in terms of how they do that and how they handle that. And I know they've had female executives on there, but I do think that like, and they are part of the broader family, but I think like having some of those kind of procedures and experiences available could maybe professionalize some of the environment, right? I think that like that's something that can trickle down from them maybe, where like, again, I think I'm saying because essentially I'm giving Tony Khan and his family, I mean, I understand that they're like they're a corporation with they're the forget the name of the corporation, not the Jaguars, the
Fulham.
Flex and Seal. I think it's called Flex and Seal. God, I forget that. But essentially, I'm saying like they have a corporate culture. They have real HR, right? Where they deal with like real Fortune 500 companies. And I think that kind of culture that they have to have within that is something that maybe can kind of trickle down and make it a little bit more apparent. I know that it's some of that early on with Brandy and some of the people kind of were available, but I do think that's a space where they can start taking the lead in terms of making themselves. I mean, I think they feel they making themselves, more vocally the safer and more safe environment to work, right? And I think that's kind of it's an important thing. I mean, I think like nobody's really doing that. I think there's like a value in having that kind of culture. I understand it's a process, and it's a carny, but like again, I think we need to start bringing this stuff up into like 21st century, right? And and understand that like we gotta bury some stuff. Like I've been a Ric Flair fan all my life, and I don't think I want to see him at a wrestling show ever again, right? Because
that's why he didn't show up. That's why he didn't show up at Blood and Guts, even though he was advertised to the live crowd, but broadcasted on TV.
I think that like, look, I love Rick, but I mean, he is a very problematic figure, and he is emblematic of some things in the past that maybe we need to leave behind. I mean, I think that like we need to start kind of thinking about how we make this a respectful space for the people who are in it, right? And just kind of like, it's a journey of 1,000 miles, but we got to start taking steps, right? And I think some of those are being taken, but let's be a little bit more formal about it. I think that that's kind of important. And again, particularly in this environment where like essentially I feel like WWE is kind of taking steps back in the way they're handling things. So I do think that it's really important that we kind of do that. And again, I think that like one of the things I said when TKO bought WWE is the one company that's worse at how they treat their performers for WWE is TKO, right?
Yeah, the way that the fighters are treated is abysmal. But by having friends who are fighters who are contracted to there, it's a pretty predatory contract. Considering how much you get paid, and then you have to pay your trainers.
I keep forgetting. Like, I apologize to the people who write these pieces, but somebody wrote the article on how that basically, or I forget if it was a tweet but explaining how the pay structure that UFC has was just inviting fight fixing.
Yeah.
Right, because essentially you're setting this up so that like you get paid for fight, like, and like you're paying them shitty unless like the fights, like it is kind of geared towards people kind of like taking their money elsewhere. You got to like compensate your people if you don't want to like create problems for yourself, right?
I do have one more comment here for Brian. This comes from Trish and Sarah.
Trish.
She says Brian has highlighted that abuses of power remain, and that the structure of wrestling continues to push a culture of silence, where hierarchy decides whether someone will be deemed responsible or not, and will challenge any attempt to change. A number of wrestlers and officials will highlight that the business has progressed from previous decades, but not how far behind it is on general workplace culture, and safeguarding it is to most other industries in the world. I am proud of him for the work he does, highlighting such issues across the industry. Thank you so much for that, Trish.
Thank you, Trish. Appreciate that.
Yeah, man. This article you wrote it's extremely important. It's extremely timely, and man, I just want to thank you for writing that. And when people should do is like look at wrestlers as people first. I think a lot of people forget that wrestlers are people, and wrestlers, they kind of put themselves out there, and this is a predatory business, and they don't have the protections that actors do. Because you see wrestlers go into acting like Cody and Zelina Vega, and I remember like a couple years ago, Zelina was all about unionizing, and then all of a sudden she shut up, and it's just something that people should think about. And I want to thank you for joining us here on State of Wrestling, Brian. And where can people find you and your work, man?
Yeah, I mean, at Brian Zilem on socials, and obviously want to just take just a moment to obviously thank a couple people here. Marcy Alonso, the director of the Coalition Against Human Trafficking, she was a
Yes.
delight. It was so interesting to kind of understand her acumen as far as how she really what she does on a day to day, and that again, ultimately, if anybody wants to take away anything from this, we're like, I mean, I think we're all smart guys here, but like, I feel like we have we're self-aware enough to say we're not experts on a certain subject. If we have like a general idea, we have an educated guess on like the ins and outs of how something can work. And that was like the important thing. I wanted to actually get people that are in the weeds, that are there, that are know that they they know what they're talking about, and that's why it was
Yeah.
so important for me to get in contact with obviously an advocate like Marcy, Rachel Rose, and I did link it in the article at Post Wrestling. Uh, if you want more, now my article was just kind of a very small story of what Rachel experienced, but Fightful did a great job last year of highlighting, everything that Rachel had gone through. If you want to learn more about her story and the work Fightful did, I do have it available on the site, or I'm sorry, on the article if you'd like to reference that. And I do appreciate the promoter's time as well. I'm not necessarily like a big time person. I really appreciated their transparency and just really understanding they're really trying to do everything they can as to do by right, but like overall, like they highlighted, they can do everything that they can correctly, but they don't have an HR system to check, lean on. They don't have a policy to really lay back on, so they're relying on trust. And when that trust is broken, what are you supposed to do? Especially like right now, we're in a state of, you know, the indies are kind of a dying breed at this point. There
Yeah.
was obviously that announcement with West Coast Pro, doing joining up as I suppose like as a huge territory with the New Texas Pro moving forward. So there's not a lot of independents out there, and it's so Arturo kind of highlighted it earlier. Like at the end of the day, I know various people from every kind of different promotions. I'm friendly with them, and ultimately, though I may not personally care for like their superior, if I can speak with them and I can find out they're happy where they work and they can go to their work place like happy and they're safe, I'm happy for them. But like just again highlighting what Rachel had to go through and potentially what else could be out there. I just want people to know, if you are a wrestler and if you're afraid to speak up, I obviously did list some resources there as well. Marcy was very kind to kind of like let me know like what like the organization like the coalition does. There's some resources on there. There's the National Human Trafficking Hotline, sex assault hotline, and domestic violence hotline, just in case if you need any reference. I know it's hard to kind of like talk about these things as well. And ultimately if this article happens to help out, bring awareness, then I'm really really happy. I'm not really looking for any kind of like shout outs or hair ruffles or anything like that. It was just really something I know it's kind of like an uncomfortable thing to talk about in the space, but I'm glad that I was able to kind of put everything together. And I really appreciate Post Wrestling obviously giving me the opportunity and platform to do something like this with a very serious cadence. And I really appreciate working with John Pollock too. I haven't had the chance to chat with Way yet, Larry, and I know that's your boy, but hopefully we'll be able to interact at some point.
Hey man, shout out to John, shout out to Wade, shout out to everybody there at Post Wrestling. They're doing really great work there. Shout out to all your boys at PW Church. I'm gonna give a shout out here to Garrett Gonzalez for linking me with you and putting us together in a little bit like this, because I appreciate the community we have there. And man, the work you've done this article is tremendous, and I hope it reaches people. I hope it reaches people in the industry. I hope wrestling fans like read this and really think critically and like give their support to this, because this is important. We need our wrestlers to feel like they can just go to work and not feel like they're in sort of like in debt to their bosses, and they can't make these strides to have a safe working environment. That's all we want. That's all I want. Like, is a safe work environment for people, because it sucks to go to work and not feel safe. That's a harmful work environment. That's a sucky place to work, and that's not what I want for anybody. And we've heard these stories across time through all those shooting interviews, through like we've been talking about her Ashley Massaro, what happened to her on the USO tour. And she couldn't go anywhere, and that's sad. And when you think about like Roddy Piper, kind of like he brings up other wrestlers when he taking advantage of him when he was a teenager on tour, and like you think about I'll bring up like this, like we just had in the GCW that pervert who took pictures of performers who were in the GCW and they were underage in different states of dress, and like it's still going no matter where in the world you are. This kind of abuse is going, and it's being underreported or not reported at all. And this is pro wrestling. This is something that we all love, and I know if you're listening to this, you love pro wrestling, and you gotta like just pay respects to the wrestlers, pay respects, and just hope that things get better. And I hope they get better. That's all I can hope for. And I want to tell like the corporations out there that are running these promotions is this is literally bare minimum. If you can make your work environment safe for your employees, I'm sure you're going to get more out of them. And this is just human decency. This is this is being humane.
We're not even going to mention who both the Arian and Nick used to work for. So I do hope we can get to a place where this feels like an unneeded conversation. And again, Brian, it's good that we keep bringing this up. I'm the same guy who, like, when the whole Janelle Grant thing kind of broke out, I kind of reached the channels to start to get Dave to maybe like do a recall on Vince just so we have the conversation.
Right.
That didn't go anywhere, but I at least wanted to have the conversation because I think that we need to continue to revisit that. I know people want to stick their hands. Some people want to stick their fingers in the air. But again, as long as I feel like workers aren't safe and the work environment isn't good, then I think that if you feel that and you respect these performers who are suffering for you, for your enjoyment, you should want these work environments to be better, right? And I think that's like, this is what I appeal to people to kind of like, let's continue to have these conversations and let's do that. And let's put like the more processes we have in place, the easier it's also going to be for the workers, because again, not having any process turns this into like the wild, wild west, right? Which is bad for everyone, right? Involved.
Don't want that.
And it's not good for the sport, and it's not good for anyone. So I think ultimately, again, let's have these, and let's hope that we can get like it to trickle down. And I said, like, I call not just for WWE, but I think AEW can afford to take the lead on this a little bit too, because I would trust them and the culture from where they're coming from. People who are coming for work for AEW a little bit more. Some of the executives there, at least, are coming from environments where like this is more, evolved, right? Whereas I don't necessarily think that TKO is, right. And again, I mentioned, some of the people who used to work for Harvey Weinstein. So it's a little bit tricky, right? We're asking from, water from a stone, maybe. And I think that, like, you hope that you get an evolution, at least maybe, but I do think it's going to take a little bit of a sea change. So I think as fans, we need to keep asking these questions and keep speaking with our wallets to try to force, there is no ethical consumption in this world, but we can try to get it to be a little bit more ethical. Right?
We could. But again, I want to thank you, Brian, for joining us here, for sharing this article with us, for writing this article. I want to thank you for coming here, spending all this time with me. Arturo, always a pleasure. My partner, mi pareja, mi primo. This is always a pleasure, always an honor to have you guys on here. This is the smartest wrestling podcast out there. I'm just saying that. I'm just tooting my own horn, but welcome here, Brian. Welcome to the Puso Penitentiary. And I just want to say, please, people, listen to Brian whenever he shows up anywhere. Read his articles, and thank you for joining us here at State of Wrestling. This is Doc. See you next time.
So this is Doc. I'm gonna be a little bit serious on this. And joining me, I was talking about this article on this particular show. The article Behind the Curtain: Wrestling's Crisis of Performer Safety and Human Trafficking Awareness, written by Brian Zilem, friend of the show. You probably heard him earlier. And I'm taking comments from audience members who I know are affected by this sort of thing, and particularly because on the show it was three cishet men talking about the subject of workplace abuse and violence. I want to have as many varied voices out here, so I decided to have one of my friends, Wooster 182, a woman, show her, kind of share her sort of opinion on the article or any kind of, you know, any kind of undertakings that she has with it. And I just wanted to say, hey, welcome to the show, Wooster.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so after reading the article, I felt like there's a lot of we don't really listen to people when abuse happens in the workplace. And I think like one of the best sort of takeaways on this was human trafficking doesn't have to be like taken. And I think that was one of the and people being manipulated by the work and feeling powerless, it really sucks. Just in the normal average day, workaday world, it sucks. When you read the article, did you have an opinion on things?
Yeah, I had a pretty similar opinion. I think we all have a kind of fuzzy idea of what human trafficking is, and I think for certain reasons, and largely a lot of the people that claim to be advocates against human trafficking like to use it as a tool to um, make certain people think that human trafficking is stealing pretty white women and children in a Target parking lot, right?
Yeah,
And that's so that you don't actually know what it really looks like, because the ones that are perpetrating that are usually the ones that are actually executing it, right?
yeah,
If that makes sense. But so I think it's good to clarify that. I don't think the article actually clarified much what it actually is. I think he could have done more to kind of explain, well, if it's not this, then what is it?
yeah,
Um, but it's a good first step. I will say, as a woman in the workplace, that maybe there was a little too much faith in an HR system in the
totally.
article that, HR's not really there to protect you either.
They're there
I'm
to
sure.
protect the company. I wanted to get
Yeah.
that out there because I am a former union steward for wherever I worked. Mysteries are there. And HR usually is not there to help you. There to help the company and make sure that they're not going to be liable for any damages because of your abuse. It's 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 a system that's pretty much there to protect the company, not to protect the workers.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure it's better than having nothing, um,
Yeah,
which is basically what the article is talking about, right? And um, I think most of us would agree that it's really disgustingly offensive that, multi-billion-dollar companies or billionaires have companies in which they can call their staff contract workers,
yeah,
but then essentially own their employeeship and then control what that looks like. And it's just rife for abuse of multiple different kinds to happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you've got people in positions of power that were in the system when abuses happened, or maybe were a part of those abuses, you can't have faith that those are the people that are going to take care and clean house.
Yeah. Where's Mama gonna sit? Yeah, I just don't. I don't believe, and I don't trust pro wrestling to make enough changes, and especially with so much union busting going on. I will say this also, like I remember, was it a couple years back, Zelina Vega was all for unions in
Hmm.
wrestling, and then she really shut up really quick. I remember Cody was big on AEW wrestlers being called employees at the beginning of AEW. And then when AEW started, that sort of just went away. And I just think that there should be some protections in place for these pro wrestlers, and as long as they're going to stay as, as independent contractors, even though they are employees, they are going to be at the mercy of these wrestling federations, no matter who it is. And that's just how wrestling works. Is they work in a way of making the wrestlers feel fear for their spots, feel fear for their job security,
Yeah.
and it's just get in line or you're gonna get out of here, and that's absolutely garbage. And we oftentimes don't see these wrestlers as people,
Yeah.
and it's it's a shame. I believe that everybody deserves a chance to be working in an environment where they feel safe in, and um, that's pretty much how I feel. I want to thank you, Worcester, for sharing this, your take with me, and I do believe that it can be that this is a good, it was a good first step of an article, but
It was.
there are things that we can always improve on, and I want to say thank you for sharing that with me, Worcester, because I this is one of the most well, probably one of my most serious episodes I've done. And I know we done shows together, and it's usually light and fun, but like something like this is really important to me,
It's
and
important.
it's really important to talk about. So I want to say thank you for joining me, Worcester. And follow her on her YouTube. Link will be in the episode description. She does a lot of great work. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Worcester.
Thank you.
And we're back. Uh, this is Doc, and I'm here with a wonderful person, a fellow union steward. I have with me H Catch. How you doing?
Doing okay. I'm excited to talk about
Yeah,
this today. I think it's really important.
yeah, yeah. So my friend Brian, you guys probably heard him on the interview because that interview is preceding these comments, which is sort of like an epilogue to that episode about sort of worker safety and other things. And I'm coming at it from the look of a union man. There was the part in there where he talked about if only wrestling had an HR department. And as a union person, the HR departments are literally there to protect the corporate interest and not there. They're there to protect the employers, not the employees. And I think we were having a conversation about collective bargaining. There, if wrestlers just got together and decided, no, we want to be treated with with respect, sort of like how the elite did when they formed the ideations of AEW, and they were able to come together and they collectively bargained as a 5-man group. Some would say a 6-man group, and it just seems that wrestlers, out of fear, out of complacency, do not think on a collective level. They seem to all be individualist and sort of just kowtow to the employers. And in the article we saw that in different levels because Booker T just runs like a little independent in the Houston area, yet they still have this
Hmm.
this this environment where you can't really say anything. Like if you say something, you're now a troublemaker because you complained, and that person who was in that article was being harassed and stalked, and that's not great.
Well, I
So
think it
how?
also speaks to the fact that people really don't they don't think through the fact that union isn't just there to represent individuals, which is absolutely part of what they do, but it's also to work with management to come up with acceptable solutions. Oh no, we have this unviable thing that we don't like. It kept everyone in their jobs still, right? Or
Yeah,
we have X thing that was being done wrong, and now we're going to earn that, holiday leave back that was inappropriately tracked. At least in my shop, we had a very friendly relationship with management because there was a recognition that if people were taken care of, they were better employees, they were more loyal,
yes,
they were more interested in working. Like it is in management's best interest to work with the union, and it is in the union's best interest to fight for higher fees, not just for the employees' benefits, but to ensure that the employees are meeting their standards as well. Like
yeah,
it's symbiotic and it's important. And it's actually why I love what the Elite did. You will never make me hate the Young Bucks and Kenny and Adam Page for how they handled that. And there are, I think, a
oh
lot
my
of
god,
other pro union interests in AEW right now, like looking at Brody King,
yeah,
who is also a former union steward.
yeah,
I can imagine if that would ever happen, it'd be there.
yeah. Because Brody worked in show business, and I think he was like part of like a lighting crew for like he was like a gopher around there, so like he knows like the life of like what you would provide from the union, like besides the living wages, besides the benefits of like the health insurance and all that. You just there's like an
He was a
ease to
lighting
it, and
technician.
yeah, lighting technician. And then I remember like in Mick Foley's book how he talked about how the WCW contracts work. They were taken care of
Hmm.
completely. They had insurance. They they were salaried employees and they got paid for whenever they would go out to work. That contract that is because of guys like Lex Luger, guys like Sting, who were able to use their agents and collectively they would talk to each other. You know, and like there's these shoot interviews about like people always talk badly about Kevin Nash, right? But there's something Kevin Nash did, and he convinced those other guys to do it too, with Scott Hall, even like to the point like
Hmm.
a lot of the boys there, they would be talking to each other. They would say how much they're getting paid, and like so when this happened, and this was during when they left, and so that's why like they were jobbed out during that whole time because they were actually talking to each other, and wrestlers were asking each other about how much they're getting paid, and so then the WCW contracts came out about how what their guarantees are and how many dates they get, and the WWF contracts got really talked about like, oh no, you just get an opportunity, but the more you work, the more you get paid. And I gotta say, when Kevin Nash talks about it, talks about unionizing, because he does talk about it on his podcast. He just he talks about wrestlers being too stupid to unionize because they're afraid, and
I mean,
it's
yeah.
to the point it's stupid.
I mean, I
But
think it's just short-sighted. I think
yeah,
unless like even in my shop, because we're required to represent everyone theoretically, right? Even if you're
yeah,
not paying dues. Until and unless you need the union, you don't realize how much the union is doing for you. It's very easy
yeah.
to ignore, especially with the propaganda. Like, I think back to Jesse Ventura, honestly. I was raised in Minnesota. I remember my parents voting for Jesse Ventura. He had
Oh
this
yeah,
really amazing campaign ad that had a Jesse Ventura politician doll. It was fabulous. But he was blackballed and blacklisted out of WWF at the time for trying to unionize. What I really, really, really wanted, and I think this was the biggest mistake the Democrats made last year. I mean, amongst many, but like in terms of the DNC, I was really once they had Hulk Hogan come out and do his ridiculousness. All I wanted in the world was for the DNC to invite Jesse Ventura, who had already endorsed Tim Walz, and rip a promo off on Hogan because he
Oh,
was fired for unionizing. He was a governor of a blue state who fought to protect civil liberties. It would have been such a great coup. It would have created so much interest, and it was such a missed opportunity.
there's something to know about a third party candidate, and I honestly believe that you gotta follow the money, and with this union, you'd have protections of the people and someone that will be able to stand up against tyranny. That's my Jesse Ventura. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah,
Sometimes I slip into
it's
him.
okay. He's got a very thick Minnesotan accent. It's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, yeah. It's there's something that really has. I can't really do it right now because I have a cold.
No,
But like, I honestly, I love. I just want there to be protection for people, and coming at it also from the perspective of, we talk about. He talked about something about the differentiation of human trafficking, and I thought that was great, where they sort of said that it's not always what's in taken. I know they could have gone further for it. And, I guess, in the sort of short article form, they're not going to get too deep into what this means. But in the wrestling terms, when we hear human trafficking, we think about the Janelle Grant case. And
yep.
it's, even into I know that it gets brought up a lot, but the Ring Boy scandal, where these boys were brought over state lines, and sometimes they would have boys in like different states go over for the weekend with the Mel Phillips, and that's disgusting. And the
Yeah.
McMahons would protect their employees, and there's just this whole feeling of it's show business. What do you expect? And that's bullshit. That's absolute bullshit. I want wrestlers to be seen as people, and they should be afforded the same rights as anybody else. Where they shouldn't have to be put into these situations, because we heard women talk about having these sexual advances towards them, or being taken advantage and being told like, oh, you have to do the storyline or else you're gonna get dropped. And I I'm just not comfortable with that. There's people that are being forced to do these things, even if they don't want to do it. And I'm, just as on the human being level, it's bad. You know.
So problematic. Like I think back to when Mercedes, when she was still Sasha Banks, walked out. She had the cachet that she was able to walk away. Most women aren't
Yeah.
able to do that. And the amount of integrity and strength and believing in herself that took. Like the thing about it really at the end of the day is if you don't have anyone who's looking out for you, abuses are going to happen. We're seeing
Yeah.
that all over the place. If you don't have regulatory framework, things crumble.
Yeah.
Now I sound
Because
like a crazy wonk, but it's true.
it's true. Because it was Mercedes and Trinity who walked out together. And then
She had to
afterwards,
go
they were
back because
both
her
buried.
husband was still there.
Yeah, they were both buried on TV. And it was disgusting. Like you had Michael Cole, and there's this whole racial implications because anytime if you're a black woman, because I know like people sort of like diminish that, but there was these interviews that Monique talked about. Monique, the actress, right? Because she had got nominated for an Oscar for Precious, right? And
Right.
so when she didn't want to do like the promotional tours in Paris because she had just given birth to her children and she wanted to spend time with her children, um, I guess Tyler Perry or whoever had buried her to the press that she's hard to work with because she didn't want to do the press tour for free without being paid. And so we have like all these people that were calling Naomi and Mercedes crybabies the whole time, and I'm just like, oh, so that's what they think. And Naomi is lucky that her husband and the family got so well connected. Like if that whole thing with Rock didn't happen and the family didn't get so integrated into those positions of power, I don't think she would be there like that. Honestly, I don't think she would have been coming back. but because she was able to come back because her family is in a position of power, that makes sense. It
I don't
makes
even think it was
sense.
she was able to come back. I think that at some point she became a problem in that her husband could leave if she was not brought back into the fold, and they had to make nice with her. Like,
Honestly,
I don't think we're
the
giving
Usos
her
are
husband enough
beloved.
credit. Like, for the same reason that Andrade left AEW to try and save his marriage, there is a non-zero chance that WWE stuffed their pride and were kind because they knew that her husband might choose her over them.
Oh yeah. Oh my god. And you talk about Andrade with this whole non
I
compete
really
where he
want him
doesn't get
just to
paid for a
sue.
year.
I
It's
just
just
want him to sue.
horrible. Yeah, you just when I watched because there's a friend of the show, David Otunga. He's talking about on his YouTube now about like the predatory WWE contracts, how there's all these loopholes where WWE tries to get you, but there's ways out of it as long as you have a as long as you have a good lawyer, you can get out of these things. So I don't doubt that Tony and Andrade already know ways because last time Andrade got out of his deal without the non compete because he challenged them about no, I can't leave and I don't have to wait. So it's just right now it's crazy and I honestly we should always be on the sides of the wrestlers, not on the sides of the companies. And I think a lot of wrestling fans sort of forget that. It's sort of
I
weird.
think we need to be on the
Like,
sides. Well, yeah, it's really hard to be on the sides of a billionaire who it wants for nothing. But I mean, as
yeah.
far as billionaires go, I think Tony Khan probably is a mensch. I think he does try to take care of his staff,
I mean, yeah, these guys
for
get like,
better for
I
worse.
mean,
I think
yeah,
he
Cool Hand Ange is on like a 2 year paternity leave right now. So
paternity leave. Exactly.
kudos.
I think genuinely his guys he will go to bat for, even those who he doesn't really necessarily know how to book. He will take
Yeah,
care of them. Like, you show loyalty to him, I think he shows loyalty right back. Will you have
yeah,
screen time every week? Maybe not. But will you be able to live a life and have work life balance? And if you show up and you're asked to work, is your hotel and your travel paid for? Yeah. If you're injured
yeah,
on the job, will he make sure you're taken care of and you are not paying for it? Yeah. Like,
absolutely.
it's almost as if Tony Khan recognizes they're not actually independent contractors, that they should just be salaried employees. But like in the current framework, he's not being forced to actually declare that.
Yeah, for now, for now. There
I could
might
see
be
him
a
doing it just to do it.
yeah. I mean, if anybody can afford it, he can. And also
Well,
like Jaguars employees and Fulham employees are probably unionized with working with the
oh,
NFL. Uh,
but even more than
so
that, like, this is a
yeah,
man that goes out of his way to donate to good causes. He's from Chicago. He follows those particular brands of politics, and as somebody with family and a husband from Chicago, this is very liberal. Like, he's not doing things. He's just maybe doing them in a way so that it's not going to ruffle everyone else's feathers, right? He's all
yeah,
but declaring them his employees.
yeah. And to this article, I just want to say this like for me reading it and for me talking to Brian, he came at it with a good with a good point with a point of action. And I honestly, this is something that a lot of people don't really talk about, as far as like when it comes to wrestlers, wrestling, and the culture of pro wrestling. I think that uh, just as people, we should look at them and like sort of like hope for them that they get the best treatment because in any kind of profession, you want there to be you want there to not be a hostile work environment. You want people to feel
Yeah.
safe, and you want people to go to work and they can just feel comfortable going to work. Because I know a lot of times we're not really in that position where we feel like we're safe at work, but that's a discussion for another time. So I want to thank you for joining me on this because I feel this was a very important conversation to have, and yeah, thank you so much, H Catch, for this.
Thank you.